it was maybe the best thing that ever happened in my life was to not win that election. I had always thought if I didn't win an election, maybe my strength was that my life did not depend on winning an election. So I was not ever willing to sell my soul to win an election.
Like millions of people around the world, we need to work. Some do it for the money, others do it for the recognition. And if you're lucky, you do it because you love it. But finding purpose and passion in your work can be easier said than done, and the path to success can be unpredictable at best. But if you're looking for some inspiration, then I've got one question for you. Are you consuming your career, or is it consuming you? Welcome to Consuming Careers. Hey friends, it's Bruce Smith, and on this week's episode of Consuming Careers, we're meeting with Cathy Cox, the president of Georgia College and State University in Milledgeville, Georgia. And if you don't know Cathy, then you're in for a real treat. Born and raised in Bainbridge, Georgia, Cathy's journey is a remarkable blend of journalism, law, politics, and education. She is a woman of extraordinary accomplishment, a beacon of inspiration, and a true testament to what it means to embrace a servant leader lifestyle. And Cathy is no stranger to leadership roles. Before stepping into her current role as president of GCSU, she was the dean of the Mercer School of Law. And even before that, she was president of Young Harris College for about a decade. Now, Cathy's story begins in a rather unique way. She started by pursuing a horticulture degree, but soon her journey diverted to follow her love for journalism at the University of Georgia, where she graduated and then worked for the Times of Gainesville and the Post-Searchlight of Bainbridge, where her stories on local crime and courts sparked her interest in the law. That's when she realized she could combine her love for writing and the law, obtaining a JD from Mercer Law School. She then went on to practice in her hometown of Bainbridge and in Atlanta for about a decade. And if that's not enough, during that time, she also served in the Georgia House of Representatives. But one of the real highlights of her career was when she shattered the glass ceiling by becoming the first woman in Georgia's history to serve as Secretary of State. So, friends, I'm excited to jump into my conversation with Cathy Cox. Let's go. Well, welcome back to Consuming Careers Podcast, and it's a beautiful early morning in Milledgeville, Georgia, and I'm so excited to have President Cathy Cox joining me this morning. Good morning, Cathy. How are you?
Good morning. It's great to have you on our beautiful campus here in Middle Georgia.
And it is beautiful. It's still in the 70s. I don't think humidity is at 95 just yet.
It will be.
It promises to be. When you're in South Georgia, that's what happens. But we are sitting on the front porch of Atkinson Hall here at Georgia College and State University, and sitting in, rocking chairs. Nothing more classic in the South than sitting on white rocking chairs. Why did we select this location, Cathy?
We call this area front campus of the Georgia College campus. We call this a movie set of a college campus. It is so idyllic. We have this huge lawn out here on the front of campus with 4 historical buildings that are still very much in use, but it is so beautiful. We're surrounded by magnolia trees, oak trees, crepe myrtles on these large porches where we have social events where students hang out in the rocking chairs to study, to get a grip on life. It just doesn't get much better than this.
Well, Atkinson Hall, I did a little bit of research. It was built in 1896. Such an amazing history here. The second oldest building on campus, right?
That's right.
Next to the governor's mansion, old governor's mansion.
That's right, which is a National Historic Landmark.
And quite a bit older. That's an old building for sure. It must have been the only thing here in the middle of a field at one point.
Yes, a lot of people don't remember, obviously, that Milledgeville was the state capital through the Civil War, the early 1800s through the Civil War. So the old governor's mansion is part of the Georgia College campus. It's a National Historic Landmark and a Smithsonian-affiliated museum, open for tours. The president's office gets to control its use for special events. But the old state capitol is also in Milledgeville as a part of Georgia Military College. So we're surrounded by history here.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to do this interview. Now, the backstory on this is I have 2 daughters, one that graduated from here already, and one that's a rising junior. And listen, my daughters just love you. So, And then I started following you on whatever, Instagram, and you're everywhere, which is amazing. I don't know, do you have a twin sister? Or I think you've got 3 sisters. But
I have 3 younger sisters, yes.
Yeah, but you're just all over there. And I just thought you are such a great example of not only leadership, but just embracing the student population. And I just love that. So I know my kids are in safe hands, loving hands, caring hands in a university setting. So this is great.
Well, thank you very much. I certainly love the faculty and staff here, but boy, the time that I get to spend around the students is the icing on the cake for this job.
Yeah, the good stuff.
Yes.
Well, you've had an amazing career, and I'd love to kind of hear about that, where you grew up, and what set you in the direction you went. You've had several chapters, which I know are all tied together, and we'll get into that, but just kind of kick us off, where you grew up and how you got into just kind of down this path.
Well, it's not hard to tell from my deep southern drawl that I am a product of deep South Georgia.
Yeah.
I grew up about as far as you can go in Georgia, the little community of Bainbridge, Georgia, in southwest Georgia, right on the Florida-Alabama corner of the state. I still love that community. My 2 youngest sisters still live there. My parents were both born there and very involved in the community, and I think that their community involvement, my father being involved in politics, he was a funeral director, my mother was an artist. My sisters and I often joke that we have the warped genes of being the children of an artist and a politician. And so take from that the varied lives we've all pursued.
Yeah, that's great. So initially you got into agriculture, but I think I heard a story about your dad said, you can do anything you want as long as you can make a living.
That was absolutely his advice to all of us when we went off to college. You could do anything, but you had to be able to support yourself, because that parental pipeline was going to cut off as soon as college ended.
Yes.
And we all pursued different degrees. I thought my life would be in plant science. I had 2 great grandmothers who were gardeners, and I loved working in the gardens with them. And so I earned an associate degree at Abraham Baldwin Agricultural College in Tifton in agriculture, horticulture. I interned down at Callaway Gardens.
Oh, great. And
had a great experience, learned to run a chainsaw and all kinds of things to do gardening to perfection.
Yeah.
But ultimately, after pulling weeds in 100-degree weather, decided maybe that would be my avocation, and I might pursue something else that involved air conditioning for a living.
And what was that?
So I changed my major to journalism when I moved to the University of Georgia. ABAC at the time was only a 2-year school, and I changed to journalism at Georgia because I like to write. It was hard for me to choose a major because, again, back to that artist mother of mine, I like to do a lot of things, and it was hard to choose. But I like to write, and that's ultimately where I ended up.
And so how did you go from journalism? Because I know you worked for a while in journalism when you got out of school, right?
I did. My first job was as a newspaper reporter in Gainesville, Georgia at the Times.
Okay.
And the new kid on the block at newspapers in those days was to be the police reporter.
Okay.
So I had the blood and guts beat. I chased ambulances, fire trucks, went to murder scenes, car wrecks.
Wow.
And had to write about crime, which was fascinating. I did, all kinds of interesting things as a crime reporter, but I also had to follow through stories about crime to cover the court end of a crime story.
Okay.
So I had to go to court to write about the hearings or the trial of anybody charged with a crime. And that's where I fell into this big black hole of the law that I knew nothing about. There were no lawyers in my family, and I had never felt more ignorant in all of my life than to go to court and have to write a story and have to go up to judges and lawyers and say, I have no idea what happened here. I don't know the words you're using. You've got to dumb it down for me so I can write a story for the paper. And that's how I ultimately went to law school. I said, I just need an education in the law so I can go back to a newspaper and write more intelligently about this. I was interested in it, but I didn't understand it at all.
But you didn't want to be a lawyer.
I had
Not really.
no desire to be a lawyer. I remember as a senior at Georgia, friends were going to law school.
Yeah.
I was a political science minor, but people said, you should take the LSAT and go to law school. And I said, lawyers are so obnoxious. Who would want to go to law school?
Right,
I thought
right.
all lawyers did was just to argue, to be obnoxious, obstructive.
Yeah,
My father was in the legislature in those days. He thought lawyers just obstructed all of his legislation.
Yeah.
I had no concept of what the practice of law was about.
So what turned the corner for that? Like, how did you embrace it?
My first year in law school.
Okay.
Got into law school and had to pursue internships. And once I got into the practice of law as a student, it opened up this world I knew nothing about, and I loved it.
That's great.
I loved the idea that I could write. I didn't know lawyers wrote. That the majority of work lawyers do is through writing.
Right.
And so that was what I thought I had a strength in. So I totally turned my world around.
So you practiced.
I went into private practice, first in Atlanta with one of the large firms, where you have corporate clients that pay you to do practice to perfection, which was a great experience and a great way to learn. And not long after I got into practice in Atlanta, my father was diagnosed with cancer. I really wanted to be at home for his last illness, so I moved back to my hometown where there had never been a woman lawyer.
And what time frame is this?
That was in the 1988, 89.
Okay, all right.
And I became the first woman lawyer in 11 counties in southwest Georgia.
Wow, that's fantastic.
And when I moved back home, all these women wanted a woman lawyer to represent them in family law matters, divorce, child support, child custody. So I moved from a corporate practice to a family law practice in a small town. And in a small town practice, you do whatever walks in the door. But there was a lot of demand from women who wanted to hire a woman lawyer. So I became immersed in family law for quite a while. Now, in a small town, that also means that you know a lot of your clients, and you know the husband and the wife, and you probably went to high school with them, and so one of them is going to be mad with you forever because you represented the other spouse in a very personal, contentious divorce setting. But I sort of made a name for myself doing well in family law, and unfortunately, Georgia is one of the two states that still have jury trial divorces, which is terrible, and I hope any legislators listening will take that up and change the law. But I had some very high-profile jury trial divorces that I was successful for my clients, and that led to other clients and a good run of practice in South Georgia.
Wow. So practicing for a while, and did you enjoy the litigation side more than maybe the contract law, or what was speaking to you then?
I did, and when I joined the firm in Atlanta, they gave you the chance as an intern to kind of move around the different sections to see what you wanted to do. And I knew my place was in the courtroom and being a trial lawyer. Maybe because I like to talk enough.
Right.
And to be an advocate and to be a persuasive advocate for my clients. So I mostly did trial work in Atlanta and both in my small town practice. But again, in a small town, you write wills for people. You do a lot of contract work, transactional kind of matters. You do whatever can pay the bills.
But that just sounds messy, right? Because contract law, you can sit in a room and maybe you don't have to talk to a lot of people, but what you're doing is you are diving into people's lives, and they're all different, and you can't control it. So what was it about that you were willing to embrace the mess?
It is the years that I was in private practice were some of the best years of the study of human nature. And even divorce law, to understand the frailties of human nature and to understand the pain that people go through of a failed relationship and how that affects them, how that affects children, and to be their advocate, their counselor with quotes around it,
Right.
to try to help them through the legal system to come out as best as you can to protect their interest was a really great lesson for a young lawyer to understand more of the world around you and what people have to deal with and what the legal system imposes on them.
Yeah.
During that time, I had the chance, after my dad passed away, he had been a member of the legislature. I had not been back home a year when he died, so I didn't have a chance. I didn't meet the residency requirement to run for his seat at that time. A family friend won his seat. Reapportionment came around a year or so later, and they changed the district line, so I had the chance to run for the legislature a couple of years later, and I did. I ran, had to run against a 16-year incumbent committee chairman from another county who never thought anybody would vote for a woman or a lawyer in South Georgia.
Sure.
So he really took me for granted and didn't really campaign a lot. But I got out with my force of sisters, and we beat him. But once I was in the legislature, I was able to use issues that arose in my private practice.
Oh, wow. Okay.
For example, seeing problems with the child support system and making tweaks to the law in the Georgia child support law to be, in my view, fairer to families, where I didn't think, for example, that the law took advantage of situations where there were multiple children as opposed to one child, and different elements where families had other obligations and the law didn't always take that into account. But seeing those kind of things and using practical situations to tweak the law to serve people better.
Got it. So how long was your father in politics? Because it sounds like he had a pretty big influence on you as having a good understanding of politics, how it works, who the players are. What was his influence on your life?
Oh, his influence was major. From childhood, I mean, honestly, he became involved in politics when I was in elementary school, and first ran for city council, then he was mayor, then he ran for the legislature in my early high school days. So as far back, honestly, as I can remember, my sisters and I were out campaigning for my dad. Honestly, in elementary school, my mother would put us out on the street and say, knock on every door, hand them a card, ask them to vote for your daddy, and I'll pick you up at the corner.
That's great.
And, in small town, safe small town, I'd hold the hands of my sisters, and the three of us, would walk up to the door and knock on the door.
How can anybody say no to that?
Absolutely.
Well, you play the cards you're dealt, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, that's fun. So politics, so it sounds like you just sort of eased into politics. There was a natural just flow right into
natural or defective genes, but I did see my dad always as a public servant. He was always, sometimes I resented it as a child, why does he have to spend so much time helping these other people? Why can't he be at my school program? Because he was always talking to somebody who had a state problem, making calls to Atlanta to solve a problem for somebody. But I understood that these people had issues they didn't know how to resolve themselves, so they called their legislator.
They didn't know how, they didn't have the power, they were out of sight, out of mind.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, and then you moved it, or you ran for Secretary of State, and this is the first time a woman. Now, is this the first time a woman has run for it, or
Yes.
Tell me about that.
So, in between my 10 years of practicing law full time in Atlanta and Bainbridge. This was early internet days, and so trying to be in the legislature 250 miles away from Bainbridge, you couldn't just in the afternoon click on your case files. You could haul a big suitcase full of your case files to Atlanta, but drive home as fast as you could on weekends to try to practice law. So I sort of had to decide, am I going to practice law full-time or be in politics full-time?
Yeah, sure.
And back in those days, Max Cleland was Secretary of State, resigned to pursue the U.S. Senate seat.
Okay.
Governor Zell Miller appointed Lewis Massey as Secretary of State.
From my neighborhood?
Yes.
Yep.
And Lewis and I had known each other. When I was in the House, he was Pierre Howard's Chief of Staff in the Senate.
Got it.
And so Lewis kind of called me out of the blue and asked if I would have an interest in serving as his Assistant Secretary of State.
Okay.
And that was when I was kind of weighing this issue. And so I said, I don't know where this will lead, but I'm gonna do this.
Now, did you have to resign from office
I
to
did.
do that? Okay.
I had to give up my House seat, moved back to Atlanta, and I became Lewis's Assistant Secretary of State.
Okay.
Which was a great opportunity to really learn what the Secretary of State did, what the office did statewide. And then a year and a half or so later, a lot of dominoes in the state fell politically, and Lewis decides not to run for the office of Secretary of State, but to run for governor.
Okay.
And so people said, well, who's going to run for Secretary of State?
Yeah.
So I said, well, I have no money. I'm not necessarily known statewide, but I know this job.
Yes.
And I will run.
And was that 98?
Yes.
98 you ran.
Yes.
And you won.
And I won.
That's fantastic. Who'd you run against?
Miraculously. I had my first opponent was a gentleman named John McCallum,
okay,
whose wife had been Miss America.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And
all right.
A lot of people said, too bad she wasn't the candidate because she probably would have beaten me. And he was a nice guy, but I had the benefit, I think, of I had made a lot of good friends when I was in the legislature, Democratic and Republican friends.
Okay.
And the Republican friends that I made, I think, generally liked me and did not work against me and thought that I would be fair as a Secretary of State. And I think that ultimately benefited me in not having a strong opponent in the general election.
Got it. And then you ran again.
I ran again in 2002.
Yep, and won. Yeah.
And
great run.
Yeah.
Thank you for your service.
Thank you.
If people don't say thank you enough.
A lot has changed. I had to answer a lot of questions in those days, namely, what does the Secretary of State do?
Yeah.
Now everybody knows Secretary of States run elections, but I had to answer that question a lot. Oh, they run elections. Oh, yeah. And then I had, especially in 1998, every week, if not every day, I had to answer the question, do you think a woman can do this job? And I'd say, well, it does not involve heavy lifting. But we had never had a woman as Secretary of State.
Isn't that a crazy question? I mean, when you pose it now, it just sounds bizarre.
Well, there were a lot of people that had not ever thought about a woman as a constitutional officer because we'd only had one.
Yeah.
One woman in statewide constitutional office, and that was the school superintendent, Linda Shrinko, who ultimately ended up in federal prison. And so there was just not a role model. There was not an experience the Georgia voting population had with women in constitutional offices.
Did you have a role model at that time? Maybe a female role model even across the country?
Well, a lot of states, even in 1998, had women governors.
Yep.
Certainly it had women in Secretary of State, Attorney General positions. And I had followed a lot of their careers. There were women in the U.S. Senate. And I had come to know through my father's service in the legislature a number of women in the Georgia General Assembly who I admired tremendously. But just like in practicing law as the first woman, I was also fairly accustomed to just blazing my own trails and doing whatever needed to be done to show the world women could do these jobs just as effectively, if not more so, than men.
Amen. That's great. All right. We can go a lot deeper there, but I want to get to how you moved from politics into higher education, administration, and leadership. So how did you move from Secretary of State? Because I know you ran for governor. I remember that. But then you landed at Young Harris College. Talk us through that and why you even considered that.
Well, so the more you're in state government, I think in Georgia, the more you see that key decisions are made in the governor's office, and so that's what really led me to run for governor in 2006.
Okay.
I often joke that's when the Lord decided, and the voters, that I should do something else. So I was not successful then, but it was maybe the best thing that ever happened in my life.
Wow.
Was to not win that election. Because I had always thought if I didn't win an election, maybe my strength was that my life did not depend on winning an election. So I was not ever willing to sell my soul to win an election.
Yeah.
Because I could always go back to practicing law. I loved practicing law. I could go back to any of the firms that I was a part of.
Oh, absolutely.
To practice law. So my first call after the election was, back to my previous firms. And so I was having good discussions going back to the practice mode when I got a really out-of-the-blue call from a trustee at Young Harris College who I had come to know through political circles who said, we're looking for a president at Young Harris College, and we'd like to talk to you. And I thought, wrong number. I said, well, I have a JD, a Juris Doctorate degree, not a PhD.
Yeah.
And there was a pause, and he said, well, you have a D, so we want to talk to you.
We'll take that.
And I hung up the phone, and I immediately called a friend of mine who at the time was president of Wesleyan College in Macon. I had been a trustee at Wesleyan. I'd been a trustee at Mercer University, my alma mater, for law school. And I said, what's going on at Young Harris? Because Wesleyan and Young Harris were both Methodist-affiliated schools.
Okay, sure.
And she said, well, I think they had a president that wasn't a good fit, but I think you would enjoy it. She also had been a practicing lawyer.
Yeah.
So I thought, well, maybe, but they were going to go through this long search.
Yeah.
I didn't know if it would pan out. They had a search committee search firm that said, I don't know, you're very non-traditional. I don't think the faculty will like you. I'm not sure this will pan out. Meanwhile, the University of Georgia Law School invited me to come and teach in the Carl Sanders chair. And I said, well, I'll go do that for a while because I don't know if this Young Harris thing will ever pan out.
Right. Who knows how long it'll take,
I went through multiple interviews for a multiple-month process, and every time I turned around, I got an invitation back. And I 10 years later, I joked with the trustees, why did you hire me with virtually no experience to become a president? But they were looking to grow Young Harris. They were looking for a skill set far beyond the traditional academic background of a traditional president. They wanted somebody that could raise money. Mm-hmm. They wanted somebody that could bring people together in a different way on that campus. And even though I would never have applied, I would never have thought I met the criteria to even apply for the job as president of Young Harris, I will be eternally grateful to the trustees for giving me that chance.
Now, they were a two-year college?
They, at the time, were a two-year college, but at the same time they hired me, they made the decision to grow from 2 years to 4 years and said, Cathy, go do it.
And that's a different kind of college.
Different. Completely different. It's like starting from scratch, from an accreditation standpoint, from starting all of your degree programs, from hiring faculty and staff. And Zell Miller was alive at the time, was a trustee at Young Harris, and had led sort of the study about becoming 4 years, but they had no idea what would be involved. And they said, Cathy, we might have to build a building. We might have to hire some faculty. And 10 years later, we built $100 million of buildings. We doubled the size of the faculty and student body. And so it was really a process of being immersed in the whole liberal arts experience and really learning about what makes for a great liberal arts experience. I love that campus, still love that campus.
Beautiful up there.
And am so grateful I had that experience.
Yeah, my father-in-law lived up there. We were up there quite often while he was still alive. And you were there for 10 years.
10 years, yes.
Wow. And so what happened after that?
Well, I got another out-of-the-blue phone call from my alma mater for law school, Mercer University School of Law, and they said, we're looking for a dean, and we really want to talk to you.
So did you feel like your work was done at Young Harris?
Well, I knew my work was not done, but I felt like I had implemented so much change that there was probably a lot of fatigue among the faculty, and there still needed to be additional change. And it was one of those things where I thought, maybe better to leave when they want you to stay than to stay when they want you to leave. And maybe
some wisdom there.
Maybe there's a good bookend for a 10-year run, because I recognize that Young Harris needed additional change, but maybe a new leader would be the better way to head them into a new phase, and maybe I needed to take a new step as well. As much as I loved the school and the campus, I also miss being in a city with amenities. It's a unbelievably beautiful campus and a beautiful place to get an education, but it is remote.
It is.
I missed a lot of my friends. And so it was a good time for a change, maybe for me, and I think for the campus.
And you were, opposite ends of the state. I don't know what that is.
Oh, yes, that's what
4-hour drive, probably.
Oh, my mother always reminded me, why are you finding the most distant place from your hometown to move to? From Bainbridge, it was 5.5 hours.
It sure is. So Mercer, dean of the law school there. So how did that go?
Well, I knew the law school was not on the main campus of Mercer. It's about a mile and a half away. I knew there would be some autonomy in running a standalone, not standalone, but on a separate campus. And I knew the law school as a graduate. And I thought the dean's position would be similar somewhat to the presidency of a small college. And there were similarities, but there were far more differences that were frustrating to me. I found out how much I like to make the decisions or be in the process of making the decisions, and a dean doesn't have that level of autonomy or authority. And more than anything, it made me recognize how much I enjoy being a change agent. Not that I enjoy change just for the heck of it, but I like to be in a situation where I feel like I'm contributing to making something better. And I didn't feel like I was in that environment at the law school.
That's good,
And I miss the broader world of a residential campus. I loved the law students I got to know, just like I love the students I have here. But I loved being involved in athletics and the fine arts and the whole broad explore the world opportunities of a liberal arts campus as opposed to a graduate program like law school. And so when the Georgia College opportunity came along, I said, Georgia College, I think, has every element that plays to my experience in life and my strengths. And maybe this is, if I get this chance, maybe this is tailor-made for me.
So how did that call come in? How did that happen?
Well, I first actually got a call from a staff person here who said, we've got a search going on for a president. We really wish you would apply.
Wow.
And I because I was not really looking to leave the law school, but I thought, well, I've spoken over here before. In fact, right before the last speech I gave, I think before the pandemic, was here. And so I thought, well, I don't know, let me check into this. But, by then, the political world, the Board of Regents are basically controlled by Republicans. I was an elected Democrat. I didn't know if they would ever give me an interview, much less a real shot at this. And so I had to do a lot of checking around to see if this would even be anything more than a pie in the sky. Nice theory.
Any surprises when you landed here, like that they didn't share? Or it was just a surprise. That didn't see that coming.
Yes, I would say the surprises are that it has been 10 times even better than I dreamed. This is one of the most positive environments I have ever worked in. The people here are so positive about what we offer, back to the change environment. I didn't have to come in and say, let's look at how we do things better. They were ready to get into the next strategic planning phase.
All right.
Ready to go embrace they were doing a lot of things really, really well here. We were already one of the 3 selective admission institutions in the university system of Georgia. We get to attract the cream of the crop students here. You know, Georgia, Georgia Tech, and Georgia College are the only 3 schools in the university system of Georgia that get to set high admission standards. So we are at the top already. But how do we make that even stronger? How do we make sure in a very competitive higher ed world that we do get the best students, that they want to come here, that they stay here, that they don't look around to transfer? And I didn't have to persuade anybody that was a need to keep constantly looking at how we do things better. Of course, we're coming out of the pandemic when I arrived here, and there was a pent-up energy to see your friends. And again, looking at this front lawn we're looking at right now, people wanted to see people on other parts of the campus. It wasn't a siloed world. People were open to working together in interdisciplinary issues. It has just been...
Well, it's such an accessible
place.
Campus. I mean, you can get your arms around it and kind of figure out where things are, and there aren't just like 100 different places where people would gather. There's a fairly small number of locations where people want to gather.
Exactly.
So can you give a little more overview of Georgia College for, listen, we have listeners all over the world, which is surprising, but give me a profile of Georgia College and what's really amazing about it.
Well, since 1996, we were designated as Georgia's public liberal arts university, and this is a campus that has really embraced that mission. But we're not your grandmother's liberal arts university. We aren't sitting around, like Socrates, pontificating about the world. We put the liberal arts to work. The liberal arts underpin all of our degree programs, but our top majors are business, marketing, and management. We're tied for the #1 nursing program in the state.
Great.
Top education programs. In U.S. News and World Rankings, we're the #6 public regional university in the entire South.
Wow.
Which is a swath from Texas to Virginia.
I love it.
We are an incredible educational institution, unparalleled, really, in the state of Georgia. And that's why the regents back in 1996 said our best students are leaving the state to get this kind of very small class, intensive, experiential learning opportunity type of higher education program. And so we have about 7,000 students.
Okay.
Which gives us the opportunity. I love the way our students say, it's small enough so that I always see my friends when I'm walking around. People know me by name, but I always see somebody else I want to meet.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
And at the end of the spring semester, one of my friends from home, her daughter is transferring here from Auburn.
All right.
Just saying.
Thank you.
And she commented, when they visited, she said, the students are not walking around with their faces stuck in their phones. They're walking around speaking to each other.
Oh, that's
because
great.
Our campus is very compact. Most of our academic buildings are on one large city block.
Yeah.
So the students don't walk around with their faces in their phones because they would miss speaking to their friends.
And the downtown isn't a bus ride away.
Downtown is just diagonally across the next intersection.
Yeah, it's a football field away, and you're there.
It's a very much a quintessential college town. Easy to walk around everywhere, although we are spread around the community, and we have buses that will take you out to our West Campus where we have some apartment-style living, our athletic fields, fitness center, those kind of things. It's in some ways a sleepy little community, but so much happening on this campus. We are a teacher-scholar model of higher education.
What does that mean? I'm not sure what that
means as opposed to an R1 where University of Georgia, Georgia Tech are doing cutting-edge research, but they have loads and loads of their faculty that do nothing but research and are doing great works and research, but that's all they do. They may or may not even teach. They may or may not have any contact with students. We encourage our faculty to do research in cutting-edge areas, but only if they engage our students in that research process. So even from your first year here, our students can be involved in undergraduate research. They talk to a lot of their high school friends who say, "Oh, I'm not even allowed to touch this kind of a microscope, until I get to be a graduate student." Yeah. And our students are getting hands-on research, presenting at national conferences as first and second year students. They're getting that real analytical experience from day one here.
Yeah, I'll tell you, I've heard the story many times of, my friends have kids that have come here and they say, well, I'll just go to Georgia College for a year, then I'll move on to Georgia, all right, because they couldn't get in for whatever reason. But they end up staying. So maybe, anecdotally, 1 out of 10 say, okay, I'm going to go to Georgia. But they come here and they're getting everything they need, and they just love it.
Well, the really large universities, sort of their model is, especially the first couple of years, to teach a lot of the core classes as lecture-style classes with 100, 200, sometimes 300 students in a big lecture hall. We don't even have rooms large enough to hold students in that quantity. So only 2.5% of our classes this past year had more than 50 students. Yeah. We don't teach like that. Yeah. We teach in a discussion-based model, which you cannot do in a class of a couple of hundred students. Only when you have a class of 20, 25 students can you actually know the students by name and get into real discussions with your students and have them with each other. Yeah. And that's how we believe you teach critical thinking, when students are called on and required to process an answer and process material. And that's the essence of teaching what we call the essential skills: critical thinking, communication skills, analytical skills, working on teams, the things that every employer wants to find in a graduate that they hire, regardless of their major.
Well, so I'm glad you mentioned that, because I want to dig into this. So around the critical thinking, and as a parent, I see this, and we talk about it as parents, about our kids, of course not mine if they're listening, lacking in critical thinking skills. And, I'll blame some of that on, it could be social media, it could be AI, because AI is now the world in your pocket, right? So we got the internet on an iPhone, so you had pretty much all the information you needed in your pocket. Now you've got you have an agent thinking for you. That really concerns me about a student's ability to continue to have critical thinking in light of an AI or Gen AI world. So what is Georgia College thinking about, talking about when they're faced with that kind of challenge?
Well, we have some nationally known experts on AI on the campus who have spoken on the subject to audiences across the country about how to learn about AI, how to deal with it in a workplace or in educational settings. And we've had a lot of workshops for our own faculty on not how to fight it, but how to embrace it, how to understand it. And believe you me, we have faculty who can readily identify an AI-generated paper. Even I laughed this spring with a faculty member who was really miffed with a student who had sent her an email, and she said, "This was generated by AI. I'm not even going to respond to it if they don't have the courtesy to write me an email that they wrote themselves." They can pick up on the nuances that are AI-generated and therefore generic and not personal to the material they've been covering in their classes. Right. And so I think for the most part, our students are, number one, smart enough. Number two, understand that this is their chance to learn how to really succeed in the world, and that they're being taught not to blow off this chance over the 4 years they have here to learn the skills that will help them succeed in life. And using AI as a tool in the right ways is part of that, but not using it to short-circuit learning the ability to think critically. Yeah.
So how do you see the future of education, higher education, over the next 5 to 10 years? I mean, things are going at lightning speed. What are you kind of anticipating and planning for?
Well, I think things certainly will continue to change, and AI is going to be part of that.
Sure.
So we all have to learn where the places are that are appropriate for using AI, how it can help add efficiencies to education and to the workplace, but where your brain power is still going to be needed and adding value in your career. Mm-hmm. So we have to keep and stay on top of those kind of things. But it's been interesting to us since the pandemic. For example, applications here at Georgia College where we, during the regular school year, fall and spring, we offer no online classes. So you have to be here, you be here in person, see face-to-face a faculty member every day, prepare for class, and talk in class.
Yes.
Now, we offer online in the summer when our students are studying abroad, working, internships, all of those kind of things. But our applications have gone up 43% in the last 2 years. And I have to believe some of that is that our students did not have a great online experience during high school, because these are the years where they had the pandemic high school experience that was not, for a lot of them, a really great learning experience.
Sure.
And I have to believe that has translated into a lot of students who want to be in an experiential learning setting where we have experiential classes and opportunities to learn by doing outside of class. So I think, at least right now, there is at least a good segment of the population that wants to put their brains to work.
Yeah, and I don't know any student, and maybe Margaret, who's doing our social media today, might have a different opinion, but I don't know any of them that it would say, boy, that pandemic was awesome for my education. I'm so thankful I could be at home for classes. I don't think any of them liked it. They may have liked it for the first couple of weeks, right? But after a while, it just wore on everybody, parents and student alike.
That's right.
When you look forward over the next 5 or 10 years, what do you see as the biggest challenges kind of facing higher education?
Well, it is a very competitive world, and in the minds of many, quote, consumers, future students, there has been this commoditization of higher ed that one size fits all. And so let's go pursue the cheapest. I mean, luckily we are a state institution, so affordability is where we are, and the Board of Regents obviously are always focused about affordability, but there is a cost to providing the type of education we offer, because it's about paying for good faculty who will be in a classroom. It is much more cost effective to teach online with 300 people packed into a Zoom room than it is to teach 20 students per class with a faculty member.
And there's a place for that.
There's a place for that. There is a place for that. And most of our graduate programs here at Georgia College are taught online to working adults who need the flexibility that you can get with graduate programs that are taught online and have flexible schedules for working adults. So we use that in the right kind of settings. But we've all got to deal with affordability and cost and keeping a focus on that and meeting students where they are and focusing on the workplace needs of Georgia.
Yeah. So kind of getting back to your kind of personal passion, purpose, drive for what you do, what keeps you engaged in this? I mean, it's a challenge, right? I mean, if it was easy, anybody would do it, right? So what really keeps you engaged in this?
Well, back to the original discussion about our students, when you see the excitement of students that you're helping them unlock their passion, unlock their ability to take the tools we can help them gather here to really make the world a better place, then you're doing something worthwhile.
Yeah.
And I think everybody looks for that something where you're having a positive impact, you're doing something worthwhile that matters in the long run of making some place better, making some place better for other people beyond yourself. And every day you come to work on a campus like this, you know that.
And just kind of reviewing your whole career and listening to you talk about the way you care about people. So I see that as a thread, and you've been able to turn that into a a very successful career. But I know I'm sure you've had challenges along the way. What has sustained you through those challenges, or how have you overcome those challenges to just stay in the fight of caring for people in a that's, like we said, that's very messy, right? When you're dealing with people, it's just a messy business.
It is a messy business, but I guess maybe it goes to my core, it goes to my parents, it goes to my faith, that there's really nothing more important than your relationships with other people. There's nothing, I believe, that adds more richness to your life than knowing other people, and knowing how to build relationships with other people and learning what you can from other people that are different than you. And I'm so lucky to have had years in politics that exposed me to people from all walks of life. I mean, literally all over the world, and all over the state of Georgia. And I just, I'm in awe that I've had such good fortune to have those opportunities to meet people, and that somewhere along the way, probably of, sort of laughing at my father, who always knew people's names, and like, how do you know those names and why do you care? And now I just value that so much and want to teach our students. We even had a discussion at a planning retreat this summer about teaching our students more conversational skills. How do you become a good listener? Not just communication skills of talking, but how do you become a good listener so that they too can enrich their own lives, become better at building relationships by being a good listener and learning how to engage in those tools of being a good human in some respects, but gaining what it is that you learn from other people.
Yeah, I mean, that's a real richness in life, is being known. And people really value that. So instead of just being heard, you're known. And I think that goes to the core of your faith as well as mine. And when you think about your accomplishments in your life, like what would be your most, an accomplishment that you're most proud of, where you really made impact or built a legacy?
It would be hard probably to pick out one thing. I would like to say that in everything I did, I tried to find a way to make something better. From the Secretary of State's job, I was the first to implement electronic voting. That's because we had all kinds of problems prior to the Bush versus Gore 2000 election. But along the way, I saw all kinds of other improvements. I implemented early voting in Georgia, which people take for granted that we've always had early voting, but we didn't used to. You could only vote on election day unless you either lied under oath to get an absentee ballot, but just to make things convenient, to make voting convenient for people. So there were, a host of reforms that I worked on as Secretary of State, but in every campus that I've worked on, to try to find opportunities for students to pursue new things, to leave our campus with a better toolkit for success in life, to build better relationships while they were on campus, to leave as stronger world citizens when they graduated, and to know I had some role in that, and that our faculty and staff were also stronger in their abilities to do their jobs, and understanding how critical every employee is on this campus to why people come here.
Yeah, that's awesome. A few more questions, and we'll wrap this up. So, is there a career, when you look back across horticulture, journalism, education, law, politics, and I know you do a lot of nonprofit things, is there any of those that you wished you would have or would like to spend more time doing? Maybe it had been a bigger part of your career?
Not really. Okay. I mean, I guess the one election I lost was the governor's race.
Yeah.
I think I could have done some good things for Georgia as governor.
Absolutely,
but
sure.
I also see that losing that election opened up this entirely new world for me beyond politics that I'm so grateful I had the chance to do.
Yeah.
So I guess when I look back and I talk to students about the fact that they're going to have 20 different careers, that it's really all about going through those open doors.
That's good.
That you never expect are going to be there for you. And you're going to face some closed doors, but just pivot to the next open door. And what serendipity there is in making the best of the doors that do open for you, because that's where the richness of life has fallen for me.
Well said. Well said. All right, last question before we get into the lightning round. When you think about your career, do you feel like you've consumed your career, or has your career consumed you?
I would have to say both.
Okay.
I gave my all, I think, to every career that I've had. So in many ways, I don't know how to not have a career that doesn't consume me. It always makes my students' head spin when I say I didn't get married until I was 40 years old.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And because my career consumed me. I was practicing law full time. I got into the legislature. I didn't have time to be married. But I didn't feel like I was missing anything. And, I dated people, and if they weren't good with the life I was leading, then, okay, we just don't fit. I had to wait till I was 40 to find the right guy who would work with my life and support my life as well as I could support his, and I found him at 40. So I have consumed my careers because they have given such opportunity and richness to my life, but they have certainly consumed my life too. I never get enough sleep, ever.
That's great. Thank you. All right, you ready? We're going to get into the lightning round now. Ready?
I think I'm ready.
Okay. 5 questions. First one, would you ever run for office again?
No. No.
Do you want to take some time to think about it?
No, don't need a second for that.
You're good with that. Okay. And what's your favorite food at the Max or any other place on campus?
Well, my favorite food on campus is Chick-fil-A.
Okay. All right.
Hands down.
Got it. And then what are you reading now?
I don't get nearly enough time to read. I love to read, and I love to read fiction.
Okay.
So I had to have some surgery earlier this year, and so I started on a book, Lessons in Chemistry, that my sister-in-law gave me, but I didn't make it but through about a third of it before I had to go back to work.
Well, I think that showed up on Netflix, or because I know I watched that with my wife.
So I hope this summer, if I get a little beach time, I'll finish that.
Yeah, that's a good story. That's a really good story. All right, number 4. Who are the top 3 people, living or not, that you'd want on your life advisory board?
Ooh,
that you could call at any time for, hey, what do I do now?
Wow. Well, I really admired Madeleine Albright.
Okay,
a former and late Secretary of State, and I got to meet her once. But I just thought her life story as an immigrant and rising to the ranks of United States Secretary of State was so incredible. I would love to have, had her as an advisor. Mm-hmm. And the same I would say for Colin Powell. Yeah. My husband had contacts kind of with him through his ROTC mentor who went to school with Colin Powell. And so I've studied a lot of his life and really admired him as well.
Those are 2 good ones.
Those are 2 really high-ranking people that I really didn't know personally, but I just had tremendous respect for. And then I've had 2 sort of big sisters that truly have been on my advisory board. 2 women named Melita Easters and Louise Hill, who have always been there to give me great advice.
Yeah, and they're just close friends.
They are. They were ahead of me both at ABAC and UGA, and have always been the big sisters that I didn't have in my family, but who are almost like family to me.
That's great. Last question. Are you willing to share your favorite pound cake recipe? And you got to tell the story on that one.
I had a great aunt, Glennie, growing up, who baked pound cakes and cookies for everybody in my hometown of Bainbridge, weekly. And so my family grew up on her pound cakes. But the story, when I was in the legislature, on the last night of the session, when things end at midnight, and I was trying to kill a bill that was going to hurt the Georgia Industries for the Blind signed in my hometown of Bainbridge, and this senator just couldn't seem to appreciate that his bill was going to deplete all the funding for this enterprise in Bainbridge. And everybody kept assuring me his bill would die, wasn't going to pop up, but it kept popping up. And so there we were at 11:30 at night, and this bill was back on the agenda to be passed in the House, and so I had to kill it, but nobody's paying any attention. It's just chaos in the House. So I'm up there in the well trying to say, please vote against this bill. Nobody's listening. And so I've got to do something dramatic to get everybody's attention. So I start talking about Aunt Glenny's pound cake recipe and telling everybody, you can't make a pound cake without real butter, none of this fake margarine stuff. It takes a pound of butter, a pound of sugar. That's why it's called a pound cake. Yeah. And I went on until people said, is she talking about a recipe? And then people started quieting down to see what in the heck I was talking about and realized I was filibustering, and there hadn't been a real filibuster in the legislature in forever. And so then people kind of got into the spirit of it and started handing me phone books to read.
Oh, that's great.
There were people waiting in line behind me that wanted to get their bills through the process before midnight. And so then people were cheering me on, and then people were getting into paying attention. So I went through all of the recipe stuff about pound cakes and then finally said, look, I just need you to vote down this bill. Vote no on SB whatever.
Right.
And they did. And I killed the bill and put Aunt Glenny's pound cake into legendary status in the Georgia General Assembly. So I think that was the last successful filibuster in the Georgia House of Representatives.
Well done. Well, you did well. That's really good on the lightning round. Okay, last thing. How can anyone find you, follow you, or connect with you?
My Instagram account is at GCSU President.
Okay.
That's where the students and I love to show off selfies.
Yes, you do.
I'm the selfie president. I have to believe somebody must be paying students to get a selfie with the president, but it's a thing here at Georgia College, and we have a lot of fun with it here on campus.
Well, you welcome it. So
I do. We have a lot of fun with it.
So we really appreciate that. So, Cathy, so thankful you were able to take some time to get together with me and to share your story with our audience.
Thank you. As we always say, go Bobcats. Come see us at Georgia College.
That's right. Thank you again. Thank you for joining us on Consuming Careers. If you've enjoyed the show, please click the follow button in your podcast app so you won't miss any of our future episodes. And if you have a minute, write us a review. We truly appreciate hearing from our listeners. And as always, I'm Bruce Smith, and you've been listening to Consuming Careers.